For more on this issue and other issues affecting this sector, we're joined now by Basic Education Minister Siviwe Gwarube. Minister, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. Thought it would be appropriate for us to start here because it largely links to your theory of change for quality basic education if you are looking at the Action Plan 2024. You've told us today that there are no big policy implementations that you're going to do, at least as you are coming in. This is a budget based on the plans that were already in place. You are going to assess the effectiveness of the programs, look at the evidence, whether indeed they're giving you the kind of outcomes that they said they would give you. For example, the Grade 9 Maths Improvement Program. You are going to look at SGB effectiveness. You are going to look at literacy and numeracy. But when you look at that structure for the theory of change, the learner becomes, I suppose, quite key there. And one of the aspects of learner that the diagram speaks to, the theory speaks to, is school safety. Do you have room for this new policy conversation with the Department of Transport on how the scholar transport can be approached? Good evening.
Good evening, and thank you so much for having me, and good evening to the viewers. Absolutely. I last week went to go and visit the schools in the community of Carltonville, where one particular school had lost 10 learners. And as you indicated in your introduction, that 4 of those learners were from one family. It was incredibly heartbreaking. And this is obviously separate to the investigation that is going on with this particular matter. But I think it speaks to a broader issue that the member of SATU had just indicated, that there has to be a way of tracking, in particular, the norms and standards of what we use and what learners use for scholar transport. And it's absolutely crucial because the reality here is that in various provinces, there are various models. As you know, the Department of Education, basic education, is a concurrent function. We allocate over 80% of the budget that's given to the department to provinces to implement, because they are closer to their communities and can implement better education outcomes. But at the same time, we have a role to play as the department to make sure that money is spent accordingly, but also that there's a transversal approach to some of these issues. In some provinces, scholar transport is managed by the Department of Transport. In some provinces, the Department of Education manages scholar transport. Regardless, though, there needs to be a standardized way of vetting scholar transport so that we can make sure that learners are transported safely to their various schools. And then I think also another broader point is that we need to make sure that schools in the close vicinity of where the learners live are of a high standard, in the sense that they offer quality education outcomes, so that children are not expected to be traveling long distances just to get to a decent school. My entire really goal in this department is to make sure of 2 things. And the one is our core business, which is to make sure that we improve our literacy, numeracy, and reading rates, to make sure that young learners are able to read for meaning by the age of 10 when they get to grade 4. And the other priority is very much around infrastructure, not just for the learners. The learners, absolutely. We've seen 30 years into our democracy, learners drowning in pit toilets, which I think is an absolute blemish on our constitutional democracy, which really does essentially guarantee quality basic education for all.
Yeah.
And so it's important that we look at infrastructure, even though it may not be our core business, but we look at infrastructure, things like decent sanitation provision, not just for the learners, but also for the teachers, but also collaborating with departments like the Department of Transport to make sure that we've got safe transport for learners to get to school. We are also wanting to have, we've also already spoken to the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure infrastructure to look at how we can partner in terms of eradicating pit toilets, particularly in rural areas where there isn't any bulk infrastructure for water provision. We want to have an engagement with water and sanitation, the department, to make sure that we get the assistance. The reality is that if we're going to deliver a quality product when it comes to quality basic education, we're going to need a whole lot of an entire whole of government approach where all of these stakeholders come together to deliver this product.
So is that why, if we look at how you've sliced the cake, conditional grants, which speak to education infrastructure, would have got the lion's share of the budget, 26 billion going to there, and education infrastructure getting 13 billion of that, a CD or 1.6 billion of that. So if you put that together, it gives you about 15 billion that is going into the improvement of infrastructure. Do you think that that is the correct way of spending this budget?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, the reality is that, I can, by all means, through policy, which is what the legislation mandates me to do, try and drive quality outcomes to try and make sure that learners are able to read and read for meaning. I can push for accountability for teachers, that we have uninterrupted time with learners and teachers in the classroom. All of these things which are our core business. But we can't do that if learners are learning in inappropriate infrastructures, where there are schools with no roofs or no windows, where children have to swim through rivers to get to school or have to walk 20 kilometers to get to school. Those things, while they may not be the core business of the department, have to be dealt with. And that's why I'm saying to you that I will be an absolute pain to my colleagues in cabinet to say that you've got to come on board, because in order for us to grow the economy, as is going to be the priority of the 7th Parliament, to grow the economy, get people into work, into jobs, into decent work, and essentially eradicate and try and reduce the levels of poverty we're seeing in our country, we've got to also make sure that at the input level, where we've got learners, we've got to make sure that those learners start at grade R and they finish in grade 12, that we don't lose learners along the way to high dropout rates. We don't lose learners along the way because parents are saying it's way too unsafe for them to go to school. We've got to make sure that learners are starting in grade R, learning good quality education, spending as much learning time in class that is uninterrupted, and getting to the end of grade 12. I think gone are the days, Thabo, where we are looking at just the matric pass rate as being the barometer of success for basic education. Yeah. My deposit here is simply that we've got to have temperature checks in the entire system to consistently check, are we on par with international standards? We about 2 years ago, received the statistics that over 80% of learners in South Africa cannot read for meaning by the time they get to grade 12. That is unacceptable. And we have to rectify that. And that is my unapologetic priority in this department. But at the same time, in order to rectify that, there are other compounding factors to these things, which is making sure that there's dignity in the way and in the places where learners and teachers are, where it is safe. And that's why even the Minister of Police and community policing forums need to come on board to say, how do we make sure that schools are not vandalized during the school holidays? How do we make sure that teachers are feeling safe when they're delivering, when they are teaching in classrooms? So those are my key priorities. That one, I need us to move away from being the last in that barometer for reading for meaning, and I need us to move up and quickly, but then also looking at infrastructure as an enabling.
So let's zoom in on that a little bit then and say, one of the areas that you would say you want to start early, ECD, in terms of that learning. Well, 350 million, it doesn't look like you've prioritized it in terms of your budget and how much you've allocated to it. We look at math, science and tech grant, 500 million, compared to how you've spread the other money. It doesn't look like you've prioritized that either.
But remember, Thabo, that allocation is an allocation that comes directly from my budget as the Minister of the Basic Education. It doesn't speak to the 8%. So of the 320 billion rand that is spent on education in the country, 80% of that goes to provinces. And so it's not the sum total of what will be spent on those matters. It's the sum total of what we would be spending at a national level. But ultimately, the implementers of education outcomes are the provinces, because we have a concurrent function between us. And when it comes to the ECD, and I want to clarify this, because of course, incorporating the ECD into the system is something fairly new, which we welcome. I absolutely think that the only way we're going to improve literacy in South Africa and numeracy is when we start learners at a very young age, where as children, they are able to read and read for meaning at a young age. And once we've already got them into the system, already at a 4, 5 years old, and they're already starting to do the kind of curricula we want to see, then by the time they get to grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, when we have the international benchmark, I do believe that at that point, they would be on par with some of our emerging and some of the developing world. So yes, the ECD allocation at the moment is low, but it's simply because it is the initial introduction of ECD into the system. Once we start spending that money and showcasing where we've started registering ECD centers, making sure that they meet the norms and standards, then we'll be able to see an increase going forward. It is also one of the key priorities of the Government of National Unity sort of priorities into in the 7th administration. So it will definitely be receiving a lot of attention from this government and from certainly myself, because I do believe it will have a direct impact on the ability of learners to be literate and to be able to be efficient in numeracy as well.
So let's talk then teachers, because that's almost it's ECDs, it's learners. We've spoken broadly about learners, then we speak about teachers as part of this theory and how the chain works together and is interconnected. Teacher knowledge and skills. You are putting some 1.5 billion to teacher education resource and institutional development. Is that adequate, particularly for the continuous professional teacher development program that is also known as in-service training?
Yeah. Look, firstly, I think I need to make it clear that the education budget has been reduced consistently for the past 3 years, Thabo, and that is the product of policy decisions which have been made. And I certainly believe that because of where South Africa is and where the management of the fiscus is, we are spending more servicing debt than we are on health and education. And we've got to rectify that. That is obviously not within my ambit of responsibility, but there's a recognition that we've got to rectify that, because once we are servicing that much on our debt, then we are taking away from frontline services. So we are not getting what we should be getting for us to be able to push this kind of outcomes. But be that as it may, we are contributing that much to teacher education. And the first allocation is obviously the Funza Lushaka bursary, which is important for us in terms of getting quality educators into the system. But also there's continuous capacitating of educators in the system. There's often a misconception, Thabo, that regular testing of the system leads to immediate and automatic outcomes of good outcomes, but that can't be the case. The point is you've got to have good quality educators who are equipped to be able to teach learners in the classroom, spend enough time with learners in the classroom, and then you've got to couple that with regular testing and temperature checking of the system. Yeah. So I think between the Funza Lushaka bursary allocation and the continuous allocation of and the continuous capacitation of teachers, we will be able to, at least in this financial year, be able to capacitate teachers as much as possible where we see gaps, so that they can be able to meet the kind of demand that we have. because we've got to set higher standards for ourselves. We've got to be a lot more ambitious, a lot more bolder. We've got to hold people accountable. We've got to hold principals accountable, provinces accountable, for the kind of teaching outcomes that we are going to see. Unfortunately, we're going to have to supercharge the kind of outcomes we're seeing in the system, because we are running out of time. We don't want to lock an entire generation of poor Black kids to perpetual poverty because we failed them right at the beginning of their lives.
How important, as you speak of accountability, as part of better learning outcomes, is this building block of professional identity of teachers? Because, I mean, you'll explain to me why you would have chosen to do that. 16 million only as a subsidy to SACE, which in my view is that body, that council that needs to deal with this professional identity of teachers that is affected by other teachers fraternizing with learners, teachers misbehaving at schools, and so on and so forth and so forth. Is that body not supposed to be given some meat and some teeth as well?
It is, and I mean, SACE is an important stakeholder for us, and in fact, I'll be meeting with the various stakeholders, including them and our entities, in the next 2 weeks to be able to just also get a sense and meet and greet them, but also get a sense from them where is their itch and where we can scratch where the itch is. But ultimately, this budget is a massive balancing act, Tabo, because we've got to essentially balance what is our core business with essentially making sure that that core business can be carried out. And SACE's role is invaluable in that, in making sure that there's safe and professionalization of the sector. But I think for now, that is what we are able to do in terms of being able to support the entity. But I look forward to meeting them and hearing them and hearing where, as I said, where their shortcomings are, what it is that we can do. I also think we mustn't underplay. I think having come into this position, I think I have been heartened by people who have reached out, who have said, we want to assist. What can we do? Because we understand the value of this sector. And so we mustn't also underestimate or rule out the participation of also the private sector to come and say, look, where can we plug the holes? Where are you struggling? Is it pit toilets that you want to eradicate? Can we come in there? Is it teacher training that you want to bolster? And so I will be the kind of minister in this role that will be reaching out to the private sector, because it is in everybody's interest to make sure that we are raising a generation of children and learners who are going to leave at the end of matric to fill the kind of skills that are needed for the economy that we have. And that is why it's important that we diversify, even within the system, where the kind of streams that learners go into. Not every single learner is going to go to a university. Some learners are going to go into artisanal work. Some learners are going to go into vocational work. Whatever that may be, we're going to need to partner up with the Department of Higher Education and private partners to say, how do we make sure that the system works? So my big message here is that many more departments in my cabinet colleagues need to come to the party, and need to come to the party quite quickly. Number two, partners are welcome. I'm happy to meet with people who want to contribute, because I think it is in the best interest of many people, because ultimately we've got a dwindling public purse. Yeah. And so, where there are people who are prepared to lend a hand, not just because they're being philanthropical, but because it also, investing in the country's future also aids them. So I'm prepared to have those conversations.
Yeah. Having said that, so how soon are you looking to put together that advisory council?
I'm very excited about the advisory council, actually, Tao, because I think that we are going to be able to do some good things with it. So I'm looking to do it. And I just want to clarify as well about, the origins of the council. The reality is that council is provided for in the legislation. It's just never been done before. In law, the Minister of Education can appoint a council that she can put together, she or he, well, she in this case, can put together various stakeholders. So I want teacher unions, SGB bodies, Council of Educators. I would like industry experts, in that council. And a couple of things that council needs to look at is our assessment of so a lot of people who call it the matric pass rate, which is but one aspect, and it's a small slither in the entire system. I would like there to be a system relook to see where do we do regular testing, where do we do systemic testing, where do we need to bolster resources, what do we need to do to make sure that we drive the kind of outcomes that we want. And so I look forward to establishing that within the next couple of months. As I said, it's provided for in law, and so it's not an extraordinary council. And so once I've met with all the stakeholders, then I'll have a very good idea of who all needs to be in the room. And I'll also have very specific terms of reference to say, this council's body, this life will be for a year or 6 months or whatever the case may be. And I need them to look at particularly this and this and that. And once they come up with recommendations, it empowers me to then to go to cabinet and say, these are the recommendations we've received from the sector. Where can we make the changes within the resources that we have? So it's actually one of the things I'm really excited about, because I think it's an important way to involve the sector in not only just simply, having unions advancing their own interests or having academics advancing their own interests. It's important to have the entire sector together saying, right, these are the challenges, these are the things we're unhappy about, but what are the solutions? What can we advise the minister on? Because I can't have the answers. I don't have the answers. But, a room full of experts and people who are in the system can certainly move us forward.
Have you met with the union, SATU in particular, on the aspect of level of job satisfaction, I suppose, is the way to put it?
So I am meeting with SATU on Monday, the 22nd of July, I think it is, but not just meeting with SATU, I'm meeting with all teacher unions on Monday next week. And I look forward to the engagement. There are 5 teacher unions, and I'm meeting with all of them on Monday in order for me to also get an orientation on what are some of the issues that their members are facing, but also not just labor issues, Tabo. I think sometimes there's a tendency to only limit engagement with unions with just on labor matters. Labor matters, of course, are absolutely important, but also like the wellness of their members, the safety of their members, the environments in which teachers are operating in. Also, the uncomfortable conversation of saying, how do we hold your members accountable against also the targets that we set for ourselves as a country to up literacy rates, numeracy rates. So I look forward to the engagement. I think that if the teacher unions are wanting to put the interests of the learner first and the interests of the educator first, then they can definitely find an ally in me, because that's certainly what I want to do.
And final, there are 2 things that you particularly looked at as your budget items, and I want to understand how they fit into your 5 key priorities, which we know: improve access to ECD, equality, improve literacy, numeracy, access to inclusive education, improve access to training of teachers, safety at schools, you've mentioned, and so on and so forth. It's the planning information assessment, which gets 15 billion, education enrichment services, which gets 10 billion. So those 2 alone accounting for 25 billion of your 32.3 billion.
Well, I mean, it's incredibly important, because it is obviously our core business. It's just, of course, education, just like the health department, gets a lot of other things that are absorbed into the system. You end up having to make sure that you've got safety at schools, you are improving infrastructure, but also, dealing with infrastructure backlogs. But the development of the curriculum is absolutely our core business. And that's my obsession, Tabo, because we are only going to be satisfied when we start to see that we voluntarily become part of these international benchmarking bodies, which is a good thing. And in fact, that's one of the things that I commend my predecessor for maintaining the benchmarking against international competitors. It's important, because we need to know where we feature. Except the problem is now we are at the bottom of that list. And so developing the curriculum in a way that is relevant to the economy, that is relevant to what the world is testing, but also that is relevant to learners so that when they leave, whether it's in grade 9 or it's in grade 12, they leave with a quality product in their hand is absolutely crucial. And so that's why, for me, that is also very, very important. I think that the branches that I'm going to be interacting a lot with in the department is certainly the curriculum branch and infrastructure, and obviously the early child development, because I think in that trio, we can really start to make some changes, where we can start to see and move the needle. So that's why I think it's very important to allocate it with the relevant resources that they need.
Yeah. Appreciate your time, Minister. Thank you very much for coming on. That's where we leave it for tonight. That is the Minister of Basic Education, Siviwe Gwarube.